Welcome to our backyard. This is the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We are two friends having a discussion after everyone else has passed out or gone to bed. Grab a drink and listen as we discuss everything from automation, space exploration, and why the meaning of life is 42.
In this week's mini episode, me and Nick are going a little different from previous episodes. We're going to go a little bit more philosophy on a mini episode. We're going to be talking about a quote that, well, before I give my opinion on it, I want to read it off to you. It will be very recognizable to everyone. It is the quote of, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." Most famously quoted by Albert Einstein, but fun fact, there's actually no evidence that he said this. And many historians credit Ben Franklin or Mark Twain with coming up with that idea. And some people even think it's an ancient proverb that either comes from China or somewhere in Europe. But with that quote in mind, I disagree with Albert Einstein's quote. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I disagree with it. And I know I am in the minority for that. I feel across my travels, many people agree with that quote. And Nick, before I continue, I want to know how you feel about that quote. Do you agree with Albert Einstein or do you disagree?
Yes and no. I agree. It sounds good, but I've also done the same thing over and over, and there's always that one time where it works.
Good. You've joined the dark side. Yes. All right. So before we get too far into more of the philosophy, I want to give some definitions. So according to Webster, the definition of sanity, well, Webster has 3 different definitions, but one I think that's most fitting for this conversation is, and I quote, "an extreme folly or unreasonable and or something utterly foolish or unreasonable." Now, I think doing the same thing over and over again is only insane, or at least in most people's minds insane, when people don't know the outcome. I think people generalize doing the same thing over and over again and say it's not insane because they know the outcome. The biggest example for me, and Nick, I'm going to bring back to trees, you're welcome, is cutting down a tree. You're doing the same activity over and over again. You're chopping a tree with a piece of metal, or like our ancestors' case, a stone, and you keep hitting it over and over again until you bring the tree down. Now, this might be like, well, no shit, Sherlock, but we didn't know this when we were first trying this. Maybe we thought we could knock down the trees, but that had to be a skill learned. And if you grew up your entire life not knowing or ever seeing a tree fall, you wouldn't think you'd be able to knock it down. But simply knowing that you could hit it over and over again and bring it down changes if it's insane or not. If you saw a person punching a tree with their fists, you'd say they're insane. If you saw a person hitting a tree with an axe, you'd say they're insane. But both could achieve the same outcome. They're just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome than the tree still standing. They're expecting it and hoping it will fall. Now, I actually have quite a few examples, which I think doing the same thing over and over again is beneficial. I think it's good. I think it's not insane. It's genius. It's faith. It's hope. And from a lot of colleagues, friends, and random people I've talked to, they disagree with me. So another one that I think I want to mention is the famed Roger Bannister. For those who are unfamiliar, his name will forever live in infancy. He is the first man to ever run a sub 4-minute mile. People thought it was impossible and that it couldn't be done. People have tried and failed. Hell, even Roger Bannister himself tried and failed multiple times. But he did it again and again and again, is still expecting a different result of beating that sub 4-minute time. And guess what? He did it. And now, because he set that bar knowing it's possible, thousands of people can even do this previously thought impossible task. Even high schooler students are breaking sub 4-minute miles. Simply knowing the outcome changes everything. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I don't think holds up true. I think it's only true if you know the outcome. But if you don't know the outcome, I think it's unfair to say it's insane to do. People might not have the vision, people might not have the knowledge or logic, but it is possible if you keep hitting it. So another one I want to bring up, which I think is very meditative and very true to life, which is water. Bruce Lee said, be like water. You put water into a bowl, it becomes a bowl. You put water into a cup, it becomes a cup. Water is a strong force of nature. And sometimes it won't take a dozen times to cut down a tree or a dozen times to do something over and over again for a result different to happen. Sometimes it may take hundreds, thousands, millions of years of doing the same thing over and over again to get a different result than the previous ones. So water eroding rock. If water crashes into a boulder once or twice, that boulder doesn't become pebbles. It takes the same thing, doing it over again and again and again until that new result happens. It's sticking with it, crashing in. Now, it might sound insane to a person who doesn't know that water erodes, but now that you know water erodes, it doesn't seem crazy. And I feel it's the same thing with human life. Now, Nick, you've mentioned that you've had one or two times where you've done the same thing over again and again, and you've had a different result eventually. Do you happen to remember any of those times, or no?
Yeah, they predominantly involve two things that give, I'd say, humanity, but maybe just me, the most trouble. Computers and two-stroke engines.
Oh God, as an engineer, two-stroke engines, I just shivered. Ooh, please continue.
For those of you who aren't familiar with wildland fire, the Mark III pump is probably the standard wildland firefighting pump, and it is the toughest but also the most fragile piece of equipment you will ever use. Sometimes they'll work for hours, days, months even, with no problems. And then other days you can run them for 10 minutes. Other days you can't even get them started. And they're extremely difficult to pull. Sometimes you just keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and everyone's like, it's not going to work. It's never going to start. You never know when that last pull the engine's going to cough and turn and start to life, and next thing you know, you're flowing water. The Mark III pump, to me, is when I first began to doubt my insanity, which maybe that is the definition of insanity, now that I think about it.
But you didn't give up, and I want to talk about that in a bit, but staying with other examples that are dear to me and are easy to relate to the general public. Think of a boxer. A boxer might throw a right hook a dozen times in a match. The same motion he or she spent years in the gym perfecting. And in that match of actually applying what they've been learning and perfecting, it might not work. Then after dozens of attempts, it works. It finally knocks out their opponent. That's not insane. But it is still the same thing of doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. The only difference is we know if one of those lands, that opponent gets knocked out. If someone's trying to start a business and they might fail over and over and over again, you might think it's never possible. But people have started business before in the past. Some people have tried new innovations from the past. Speaking of innovations, I think a big point to Albert Einstein's quote is scale. I disagree with the scale. I think if you look at an objective scale, large scale, it changes what you think of insane versus effort. Take Thomas Edison, speaking of inventions. Now, Thomas Edison tried over 1,000 ways to make a light bulb. Now, you could make the argument that he was making tweaks and modifications along the way, which is true. But I guess it really does matter what scale you are talking about. From a large view, Thomas Edison tried 1,000 ways to make a light bulb, trying again and again and again. From a small view, each light bulb he tried was slightly different from the last. Still doesn't mean he's insane for simply trying to do the same thing over and over again. When you're chopping down a tree and doing the same thing over again, you're changing your angle a little bit. Just a few degrees makes a huge difference. It does matter. And even if you're not changing a little bit, going back to the water, if you hit the same spot 1,000 times with water, you can break down the rocks and the sediment and form giant structures like the Grand Canyon here in the United States. Simply because you can't understand it or see it doesn't mean it's not true or possible. Now, Nick, you said you started doubting your own insanity, but yet you stuck with it. You tried it again and again and again. To me, that's simply faith or simply hope. And I don't think it's insane to have faith or hope. And it's amazing how we think simply doing the same thing over and over again is insane. Another example before I change up and go to a little different direction with the philosophy is a baby learning to walk. No human is born walking. They have to learn it. They have to try again and again. Try and do the exact same thing over and over again. Wanting and willing until they get a different result. They are still trying to stand up, trying to move forward. You learn a little bit, but you're trying to do the exact same thing over and over again. But babies aren't insane for trying to learn how to walk. That's just normal because we know the outcome. Knowing the outcome makes a huge difference. But when we start moving that outcome, people call you insane. Now, Nick, as I switch this up, I have a question for you. Have you ever done something where people thought you were insane, but for some reason in your gut, in your head, you just had this feeling that you were right and you went along with it? Have you ever had this happen any time of your life?
Yeah, I think everyone's had this happen in their life.
And I think it's safe to say that people have called you lucky because of it. Not that you were right. No one likes to hear, I told you so, or admit they were wrong. So sometimes people admit that you were just lucky. But there's a difference between lucky and hard work. It's amazing to me how insane and genius, or obsessed and disciplined, are so close to each other. The only difference is if you succeed or not. And I think that's important, going back to Albert Einstein's quote of the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If you do something that's weird and different and lose, people say you were stupid, that was insane, you were psychotic for even trying that. But if it works, people say, oh, you're such a genius, you're such foresight, you have such a better understanding than everyone else. And you might have to fail 1,000 times in order to get that one success. Now, Nick, I've been kind of rapping on a little bit, and I want to hear your opinion. Do you agree with the points I'm putting up, or do you disagree?
No, I agree. I think it's kind of like we talked about in the BS episode about luck, in that a lot of times when someone recognizes or say someone got lucky, it's because that person took advantage of an opportunity, but opportunities may have been presented to other people that they never took advantage of, and you wouldn't consider those people lucky, even if they may have had the same opportunity. So I think it's more action than it is circumstance.
I like that word, action. Doing something over and over again, an action, continuing to try to run a sub 4 minute mile, to continue trying to walk, continuing to try to make a new type of light bulb. It's an action that you are taking over and over again and hoping, and in your head you can visualize it, you dream about it, you can taste it, it's almost there. You keep trying and trying, failing and failing until you get it. So, some interesting points I want to bring up is, you know what some synonyms and related words to over and over are? Consistency, continuation, uninterrupted, again and again. Things that we would correlate with discipline, with effort. It's the same thing with over and over again. It's a type of mindset to me. Insane isn't always crazy. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people who are insane and crazy, but because you're a little different and you see the world a little different, doesn't mean you're insane or crazy. You might be able to see things others don't. You might have different attributes, your brain wired a little differently, to make you go farther than the ones before you. And Sometimes it takes doing the same thing over and over again to break that new record, to set that new bar, to create that new invention. And that will open dozens of doors for others to follow in your footsteps. You're not insane for doing it. It might take courage. You might have to take humiliation to get through it, but once you succeeded, you're the one who saw what everyone else couldn't see. I can't imagine the amount of inventions and creations that have been made because people were not willing to give up and try to do the same thing over and over again. Now, you might think it's all crazy. You might make the argument that, yeah, like Thomas Edison, they're making little modifications. But I think that's picking at hairs. I think you're changing the scale to fit your situation. It's doing the same thing over and over again. You're trying to make that new vacuum cleaner over and over again. You're trying to make a new water pump over and over again. What Albert Einstein, even though Albert Einstein probably didn't come up with that quote, definition of insanity, which I still, to this day, will stand that quote is wrong. That quote only works if you know the outcome.
I agree. Like I mentioned, other people had given up trying to start the pump or even just trying the same thing on a computer time and time again. But there's that one time where it works. And it seems more often than not, if you just keep working at it, that eventually it'll work. You just have to keep trying. And you'll be sitting there starting that pump, pulling and pulling and pulling, and without fail, someone will mention, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And then 10 minutes later, that pop, 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 and then you can't hear. That's a sound of success. I don't know how many times it's happened. To me, I hear that quote all the time at work. Someone always says it right before some motor hums to life.
I want to battle Albert Einstein's quote with another quote, which I think is very fitting for the situation. It's an old proverb that has changed based on cultures and time, but pretty much goes, fall down 9 times, get up 10. I think that's very true to Albert Einstein's quote of insanity. No matter how many times you fail, you get back up again. And I think to tie those two quotes together, a perfect topic point would be athletes. Look at how many kids dream of being super athletes, making it to the NFL, making it to the World Cup, etc., etc. They'll keep trying to do the same thing over and over again. They'll keep trying to learn how to throw a football. They'll keep trying to have a perfect serve in tennis, and they'll fail over and over again. And each time, they expect a different result. But they're not crazy for doing that. That's hard work. That's dedication. It's how many inventions, businesses, artworks, athletes, movies were all created because the idea of sanity was doing the same thing over and over again. An athlete, if he wants to run faster, he runs further and he runs more often, trying to pick up that speed, might add more weight to himself or herself, and trying to pick up that speed, might lift more weights, trying to get stronger. And at the end of the day, they're doing the same thing over and over again. They're just simply trying to run faster. An art piece from an artist might take them a dozen times to paint that one perfect picture, doing the same thing over and over again, trying to get those strokes, trying to get those lines. The only difference that people say is because we know the outcome. We know if an athlete works out harder, they'll be able to run faster. We know if an artist has a more steadier hand over and over again, or trying to do the same thing over and over again, the chances of success are higher. But if you take away that vision of the outcome, so many people think you're just insane. So many people can't see what's behind the closed door. And that bothers me so much, of people don't have hope and faith to pursue and run through the weeds and the tall grass to get to the other side.
This reminds me a lot of fishing. When I moved out west, I predominantly fished just lakes and occasionally a river. But now I live on the west coast and I get to fish the ocean, large rivers. And I really wanted to catch fish in the ocean. And I had no idea how to do that. I talked to the guys at the tackle shop and asked them what to do, and they told me generally what to do. I went out for probably 3-4 weeks. I go out, sit on the edge of the surf, cast, reel in, repeat, move, cast, reel in, repeat. I watched videos, I read books. Weeks would go by, I still hadn't caught a fish. People were beginning to be like, wow, how do you go out and not catch a fish? Why do you keep going out? After the 4th or 5th week, I finally go out and I caught my first surf perch. not even a hard fish to catch. But I didn't know those minute details that I would need to clue me in on where the fish are, how to read the waves, how to read the surf, understand what the ocean floor looked like by looking at the waves, their feeding patterns, when to fish for them. All those times I went out and failed, I learned very tiny things that I didn't even understand until later. And at some points I thought I was insane. I was like, why am I going out here? I'm not going to catch any fish. But I just kept challenging myself. After 3 weeks I was committed. I was like, I'm not leaving till I get a fish. At least it was on the edge of the continent. It's a great, beautiful place to be. But man, I was pissed off. I finally caught one fish. People max out. They'll catch 15 fish in a few hours. But man, that one fish made everything worth it. All that failure. But it was insane. I just kept doing, I don't even know what was different about that time than the other times.
Sometimes it just takes one opportunity, one shot, and everything can change. You just have to keep hammering, doing the same thing over and over again until something changes. That's a perfect example, Nick, because you know the outcome. If you fish a bunch of times, eventually you'll catch a fish. But you were having self-doubt. You were having questions and questioning yourself if you could catch a fish in the ocean. But doing it again and again and again, you finally got that fish and been catching fish since then. To yourself, you're making yourself insane, thinking it was never going to happen. That self-doubt, that society to think of, how does this man not catch a fish, or it's impossible to catch a fish. Everything's impossible till it's not. Everything's impossible until one person does it. That's why I don't like the word impossible. It's simply improbable. Now, as we close off this little mini episode, I want to leave this one quote, because without a doubt, I'm crazy. Nick, I think you would agree with I tend to be weird and crazy. But a quote from Robert Wilson: "Of course I'm crazy, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong." And I want people to think about that. You can be crazy. You can fail 1,000 times. If you stick with it and you see something others don't, you can succeed. You can do the impossible.
And that brings great joy to me for eventually satisfying my wife. Thanks for listening to the Backyard Philosophy Podcast. We rarely finish a podcast without missing a point we wanted to bring up, so let us know what we forgot. And if you have a topic you want us to talk about, let us know at Backyard Philosophy on Instagram and Backyard Philosophy Podcast on